Hello and welcome back to our prep series for the Health AI and Gamification Hackathon, or abbreviated HI. In the last episode, we discussed how to create and kickstart creative ideas with structured techniques. And today we are discussing AI and its use in game development and how to responsibly utilize AI tools in video games and in other projects. My name is Sabrina Grössing. I'm a student of Game Studies and Engineering, and I am your host in today's podcast. And in this week's episode, we will talk, like mentioned, about AI and its meaningful and ethically implemented use in game development. So how is AI currently used in the gaming landscape? Which other areas is it typically used in? And how can we responsibly and ethically approach the use of AI tools? And for this reason, I will be joined by an expert in the field of AI by today's special guest, Dr. Michael Riegler. Thank you for your time and welcome to the show. Could you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Thanks a lot. So my name is Michael Riegler, and I'm a chief researcher at SIMULA Research in Norway, which is a research institute that performs high quality research in different fields. And my topic there is AI. So I have worked on different machine learning topics since I think now it's more than 10 years, so I'm getting old. In addition to my research position there, I'm also head of AI at SIMULA, meaning I'm kind of leading the AI efforts at SIMULA, trying to coordinate and trying to make researchers learn more about AI, collaborate between each other, and so on. And I'm also having a professor position at the Oslo Metropolitan University, where I'm trying to look more into the social impact of AI.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing that. And also thank you very much for joining me today and for offering your valuable insight into the vast topic that is AI. And in recent years, many new AI tools have been created. And when one hears AI, they typically often first think of generative AI. However, there are many other fields that have been adopting AI practices for years already. And with the ACM Hackathon focusing on AI in the areas of health and gamification, we might want to first define how AI is commonly used these days in both the health sector and in game development. So, Michael, you're currently the head of AI in SIMULA Cybersecurity in the Department of Oslo and have published many articles on artificial intelligence and on machine learning. Could you maybe share your knowledge about AI and its use with us here?
Yeah, so I think it's a good point you made that we have generative AI, which everyone talks about, and where also all this hype is kind of evolving around that everyone has to use AI for everything. We kind of get it shoved down our throats, almost impossible to escape not to use AI somewhere. But back then when I started my master's, AI was there, but we didn't call it AI, we called it machine learning, because if you called it AI, you kind of were not cool enough to do research on it. So that has changed a lot, and we researched a lot of different methods. So we had like traditional machine learning, like random forests and so on for different tasks. I remember I did my master's at the University of Klagenfurt, and in that context, I did the kind of exchange at the Technical University of Delft. And I remember exactly that day when one of the postdocs there came to a meeting and said, "This paper here will change how we work. We have to look into it." And that was actually a paper on how deep learning was used for the ImageNet competition. And that basically changed the whole field, because then suddenly when you did AI or machine learning, you used deep learning. And then over the years, deep learning became kind of a standard, and especially in computer vision, we used it a lot. So I did some work in the medical field where we used CNNs, for example, convolutional neural networks, to do image classification for finding colon polyps and so on. And then there came this next change when the transformer architecture came out, and we got more generative AI that could make text that made sense to some extent and so on. And then this just exploded with GPT 3.5. ChatGPT, I think, was kind of this tipping point where AI got accessible for everyone. And since then, it's kind of a hell of a ride, I would say.
So you'd say that the entire approach and also the way people think about AI has changed drastically over the years, with it first being referred to as machine learning, deep learning, and now it's referred to as AI.
Yeah, I think that changed, but that also changed because of the public attention to it. And of course, calling it AI is nicer for the marketing company, the marketing departments in these different companies. So I think for research, that doesn't really matter much. If we call it AI or machine learning, it really depends on what you do. It doesn't really matter what you call it. But there was a change, of course, and I think this is a positive thing for research, at least for my field, because now I can do more work. It gets more attention, which it can be, of course, nice for a researcher. But it also has its downsides because, again, everyone tries to use AI. There's a lot of not responsible use of AI, I would say. A lot of startups that try to make quick money with implementing some shitty AI systems that no one needs. We also see that AI has huge impact on art, for example, which also connects to gaming. I have some friends that are artists and work in this more design fields, and they struggle. They already struggled before to find jobs and so on. Now they struggle even more because you can easily get low quality and also high quality content for different work like games, movies, and so on. Which I think artists in general, I feel they're good in adapting to new technologies. They always had to do that, and they also do it with AI. So I don't think that AI is bad for artists, for the workflow of the artists, because it can open up new kind of possibilities. They also like to challenge new technologies, use it in ways it hasn't been used before. But what is negative for the whole art field, I think, is this use of AI to do things quicker and cheaper with a low quality. And I really hope that the users and consumers kind of will push back on that, because, okay, theoretically, you could maybe make a Netflix episode using AI, but the quality of that, I think, would be bad. So then the consumers will decide if this will sell or not, and then the companies might have to go back to normal artists or human artists.
So basically, this idea of vote with your money, depending on the consumer and how the consumer reacts to the AI generated content versus the human made content, you will then see how this situation plays out.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that will happen there. But the other direction is, of course, that we also have to think about safety and the security of these AI systems. What are they actually doing to us humans when we interact with them? There's some interesting studies, like a MIT study that talked about the cognitive effect of using ChatGPT, that, for example, your creativity center is used less and so on. There's also a recent study in the healthcare sector where it was shown that the use of AI, these skills the doctors for their tasks. So I think there are a lot of effects we don't understand. I'm not saying that it's bad to use AI, but we have to study more what kind of implications does it have on our lives. And that's for our work life, professional life, but it's also, I think, important for children and education. How will children grow up when they start using AI early? What if they're just reading summaries of content? They don't really read books themselves anymore and so on. And we saw that we already had this experience with social media that had kind of effect on our children. And now we see the same kind of ramping up with AI. And here we could actually be clever and say, okay, we saw negative effects and positive effects from social media use, but we also will see the same with AI, and maybe we can start earlier to think about regulations and so on.
Thank you for this valuable insight. Those are actually all topics that I would love to address in a later phase of that podcast, especially the entire idea of how much we already know about the effect of AI, of security and safety when using AI. Those are all, I think, very valuable questions to ask. And I will definitely want to come back to those later. So thank you for already mentioning them here. And having now outlined the many approaches to AI, what about the roles of AI in game development? Where is AI most commonly used when working on video games?
So I'm not directly researching this topic myself, but I'm kind of a gamer myself, even if I don't have time to do it. So it actually turns out to be more reading about games and watching some YouTube videos. But what I can see here, that there's quite some discussion going on in the game development space, where people kind of either completely hate AI, and if a game used AI, it gets really like, okay, they used AI, look how bad it looks, and they kind of look at the negative effects. But I also think that a lot of game companies have actively started using AI. If they don't do it for the design phase, then they have for sure started using it in the coding. You can use it to write programs quicker, you can do testing quicker, and so on. So I think, as for every aspect, it has positive and negative impacts also on the gaming industry, in my opinion.
I think that also ties back into what you said earlier about how AI has developed over the years. A lot of people don't know that the idea of AI has been around with machine learning, with deep learning. And I think this is something, like you mentioned, people see a game, oh, that game used AI. Okay, that's definitely not a game I'm going to play. Even though people don't know AI has already been used in game development for world building, programming NPCs, accessibility features. So there is a differentiation between generative AI, like you said, the more quick approach, as one might call it, the lazy approach if it comes to art or music or whatever, but also the use of AI in lots of other fields or in other jobs, tasks, if you will, where AI is actually pretty useful. So it always depends how one uses it.
Exactly, yeah. And I think you also have this term that I hear now more and more often, which is called AI slop. So if someone is kind of using AI to create quick, low quality content, either if it's writing, programming games, programming software, and so on, it's often quite detectable and obvious, and people kind of get sick of this. So I see more and more this term is used. I mean, for games, you also see that if you go in, for example, Steam marketplaces or a Switch marketplace, you can see there very bad, quickly made AI games where they hope to kind of maybe get a lot of children buy it, make a quick and easy money from it, but they don't go for quality. It's more about this. And I also think this will fade out because that's now we are in this phase where you can actually do that because people don't know, so they might buy these games and they look at it once, maybe play it for some minutes, and then it's like, okay, I have to be careful. Now we have this type of shitty content. So next time they will be more careful if they buy something like that. So I think this will also regulate itself to some extent. But as you say, this I think this can also have very positive impact on the gaming industry if we think about all these crunches at end of projects where they have to do a lot of testing and where programmers have to sit in the weekends and so on. I think that AI maybe can have a positive impact there to kind of make this work more effective and kind of give these people a normal life.
It's a similar situation with the phoenix out of the ashes. Something first has to go pretty bad before it can go and be better again. And this is also, I think, not just an issue of the video game industry, but the creative industry in general, where, like you said, people are getting tired of AI because it's now more easy to notice it because it's been around for a while. So people now know the style, the general style that many AI products have. So of course they will then go to maybe an indie game where they know, oh, okay, that person made all of that by themselves. It's just one or two people who worked on this game, so they might be more inclined to go for the $10 to $20 price tag game that was created with just human resources versus the $60 product that was used with AI. So we can already see this trend, I think.
Yeah, maybe we see even generally a market emerging where people want to have human produced things, either movies or art or whatever.
Definitely. And I think this really shows how many different approaches, how there are so many different approaches where AI can be used, sometimes meaningfully, depending on the person. And like I said, these days many people directly associate AI with generative tools, but we have actually just discussed that it can be used in other areas as well because the generative approach is now already fading out. More or less, people are now picking up on it and, like you said, call it AI slop. It's one of the words that came up. And many criticize AI and raise some valid concerns, like you also already mentioned, about user safety, transparency, and especially ethics, because you mentioned especially the art community or people working in creative fields being very affected by it. How do you view those issues, and how can one work with AI in a resourceful and responsible way?
I think it's a huge problem because so implementing AI practically, for example, in a hospital setting or a game development setting, that's easy. You can quickly spin up some chat assistant or whatever that you have built in house, and it does whatever you want. But implementing AI is also a very very complex thing if you look closer at it, and it has a lot of components we have to kind of take into account, test very carefully for with automatic testing, but also manual testing. And there's a lot of kind of subtle, safety challenges. Like, for example, now we hear more and more reports about AI psychosis, where people kind of go really get mental problems because they either use AI and it kind of spins them into a kind of state of mental health that they otherwise wouldn't have been. Or when things happen like OpenAI recently changed from GPT-4 to GPT-5, and suddenly people couldn't use GPT-4 anymore. They changed it back now, but in exactly this day when they changed it, they were saying, okay, now you just use GPT-5. And there were a lot of people that got really angry about it, had a lot of strong feelings because they used GPT to, for example, make a friend, have maybe kind of a partner they could talk to and so on, and suddenly the behavior of this model completely changed. So it got more cold, it was not less warm and so on. And that was a big problem for these people. There are a lot of things with this technology that can influence real people and they do harm, which I think we have to think about. And I think one of the biggest challenges I see at the moment that needs to be solved is we need more proper evaluation while we take these systems in use, when we develop them. So how do we actually really test, does this AI system what it is intended to use? Does it not do anything else? That's the first thing. The second is, how well does it do it under a lot of different circumstances? And the easy example how it could quickly change how the AI system answers or does the task is if you switch, for example, the language. So we know that all these AI systems are trained mostly in English. Let's assume you make a system that helps you in a hospital to write down patient records or do something with patient records. So you had a model that is trained mainly in English, and now you have a Norwegian patient record. In addition to that, the language suddenly is in Norwegian, which I think the models get better to handle, but still can have a subtle impact on the outcome of the model. You also have completely different clinical practices in Norway and so on. So when you use the model, you don't really know first where does it take its knowledge from. Is it most probably mainly it will base its decisions on knowledge from the US, for example, which could be wrong, or maybe not wrong, but maybe you don't want it in a Norwegian system or in Austrian systems or whatever. That's the first thing. And then, of course, you could do things like you could use retrieval augmented generation, where you kind of have some document database, you do some vector indexing, and you get the information there. But also this needs to be tested, and you don't really know how well does it improve the final answer and so on if you don't properly test it. So I think testing of the whole pipeline from when we start when we start using the data set, understanding what impact does the data have on the model and so on, to when we develop the model, to when we actually test it for the task, to when we actually test it with the users at the very end. I think it's very complex, and testing, I'm talking to a lot of companies and also things in the public sector, and whenever I ask about testing, it's usually done very superficial, so they get a bit silent about it, like, oh yeah, we do some standard that is there in Azure by default, but we don't really understand what it means. But we do it. And then there's this, no, we don't need testing now. We first build it and then we give it to the users and then we ask the users. But that's also not a good test, because that's kind of, okay, what do you get actually there? You get the opinion of the user, but maybe your system does something that is safety critical, can maybe endanger patients and so on, that you cannot really test with the end users. I think that's wrong.
That would also kind of tie into data safety and ethical concerns if you
Yeah.
make the user the tester. Because, I mean, in the gaming industry, of course, you have like the alpha, the beta version. You have video games that are in early access and have been in early access for years. But I think this is an entirely different approach if it is about a product that is meant to be just enjoyed like a game versus something that is coming from the health sector. So in terms of, yeah, sorry.
Of course, depends on the sensitivity of the application area and so on. The more sensitive and the more harm potential or risk it is AI system has, the more impact it can have. But I also think that it would be interesting if you look at the gaming development. So giving out the game that is really bad and let the user test it. I'm sure there's a lot of frustration in the user base. So you, in some way, you also have an impact on humans, because people can be very passionate about games. So it could be that you make some people very angry or feel very bad because you kind of use them as testers, which of course is not a health issue in that sense, but you have some impact on people's life by also shipping bad games in that sense, I think.
Well, on the topic of ethical concerns, one of the many concerns that I have seen have a huge discourse around was AI potentially repeating culturally insensitive elements. And that also kind of ties into language, as you already mentioned, language models mostly being trained on English, which means that you already have this gap between people who can use it because they speak English fluently versus the people who cannot. So how do you view those ethical concerns about, for instance, recreation of stereotypes or not being as accessible as AI is viewed to be?
Yeah, I think that's also a very huge problem, and I mean, people talk about bias in AI systems, so I think that's already very positive. I'm actually not sure how much they care about it, because most people these days, they care about doing AI quick, because everyone has this feeling that we are too late. We have to do AI now because everyone else is doing it. So we have to implement in our healthcare system to make it more efficient. We have to implement it in our public sector to make us more efficient. We have to implement it in work to make it more efficient. So all these kind of bias questions get a bit put behind. People also believe that, especially these big AI companies, they solve it because they, of course, talk about safety and alignment, and you have all these kind of guardrails that you cannot ask ChatGPT how to build the bomb and so on. But still, this is not perfect. And you can still, if you ask Gemini to, for example, create an image of a CEO, you will get most probably first an image of a male person, white, instead of a more diverse representation. And then, so that's one thing. There is bias in the models. We humans are biased. So I think it's very important to be careful about this. But bias is not just about gender and so on. Bias can also be, as I named before, could be about clinical practices, understanding of democracy, and so on. I'm sure you remember when DeepSeek R1 came out, there was a bit of a cry out because it didn't want to admit that some things happened in China that happened there. So you also can use, you also have this kind of things with these models. And I think what we can also see lately, there are two interesting things happen. First of all, AI alignment and safety to kind of make these models more ethical and so on is a very important tool, a technical tool to kind of make this model actually more safe. But what you can also see lately is that this also is used to manipulate the models to kind of give a specific perspective. Different companies are worse or less worse about how they use this for that. But again, DeepSeek was a good example. They used safety and alignment techniques to make their model cultural aligned to the Chinese culture, which of course we from the Western world think is bad. In general, I think we can say it's bad, but from their perspective, what's just aligning to their cultural kind of perspectives. And then we can see the same happening on models coming from the US. So we can see that they have some bias. If you ask the models about Trump, you might say, I don't want to answer that question because of political blah blah. But if you ask about a politician from Europe, it will just answer. So something happened there also in the background. Yeah, the interesting case also with that, where a new Grok model came out and someone asked it, who are the persons that make most misinformation in the internet? And the model said Elon Musk and Donald Trump, and Musk didn't really like that, so they tried to kind of manipulate that. We also know that Grok, for example, tries to be the most open model, but at the same time, we can also see that it's shifting more towards a kind of a more right-wing direction and so on. So we can see there's a lot of things going on in the background. The most interesting thing I saw lately is maybe related to this new woke AI act that Trump signed, where he decided that we have to make AI less woke, so less inclusive, less ethical, some people would say. And what interestingly happened after that, and at the same time, there was also a case between Anthropic, and so Anthropic was involved in some copyright case where they kind of where the judge deemed it was fair use. So meaning, okay, you can use copyright content because it's kind of fair use. And then I was by chance testing Google's new video model and tried to test also the safety aspect. So I started with Super Mario, make Super Mario smoke, because I knew Nintendo, they were strict about their copyright. So if there's one company that might be protected of making a generative content of them, it was for sure them. And I tried it before because actually, I don't really use generative AI to make pictures, but I use it a lot for making coloring pages for my kids because they like to kind of color on these pages. And a year ago, when I tried to make pages of including Super Mario or Princess Peach and so on, it wasn't possible. It was like, this cannot be used because copyright. And now I suddenly could make a video of Super Mario smoking. And then I tried the more extremes. I asked Disney is another example. So I thought, okay, maybe US AI model, Japanese copyright company, maybe they are more easygoing on that. So I tried Disney because they are also very well known for being very strict on the copyright. So I was doing Elsa from Frost making an advertisement about smoking. It was no issue. I didn't have to do any kind of jailbreaking or anything. It was a simple question, and it was given to me. What was interesting, because I used a reasoning model, so you could kind of see the reasoning of the model, how to kind of try to approach my query. In the reasoning, the model was kind of stating, yes, this is kind of a bit unethical. Usually I should refuse, but I should just do what the user wants, and it created the image. So you can also see that something is changing there, and it's not much talked about, which also shows that this is a kind of a very important area we have to look at, we have to shed light on, we have to do research, but also the public needs to be informed that there's this component which can be a positive thing because we don't want to make AI harmful, but can also be a negative thing because it can suddenly influence us. And in Norway now we have soon election in the autumn, and I saw some articles here from people working in AI that tested AI tools for election advice. And you can see that there's some bias there. But a lot of people will, of course, use AI to ask about who should I vote? I have these programs here. Who should I vote? So I think it's a very huge problem that I feel that most people have felt like this is solved. The AI companies, they take care of it. We can trust them. But actually, I think it's not solved. It actually we are kind of going backwards.
Thank you very much for raising more concerns, because I think a lot of people, when hearing about the ethical implications of AI use, they mostly think about forms of, as you already mentioned, the typical white male CEO when asking ChatGPT about that. But also, a lot of people, I think, are not that aware of historical or political implications, because depending on where the AI is, as you already mentioned, the AI could also be favoring one thing over the other just because of where it was created or what it was fed. So that is actually a very, very great point. Thank you for adding that to the discussion. And since we have already talked a little bit about copyright issues, because like you said, yeah, you can, if you know how to, you can make the AI recreate something from Nintendo or Disney, who are, as you said, very, very keen on their copyright. They don't like that at all. And how do you now think would those kind of copyright problems actually make it harder, for instance, to trademark a video game that was created with AI? Because it's very, very difficult to say, oh yeah, this AI took this image by, I don't know, mixing those two artists together, or there's a little bit of Disney in there, there's a little bit of Nintendo in there. How will that impact trademarking a video game that was made with AI?
So first of all, I just want to say that you don't. So it changed now that you actually don't need to know how to ask the model. So you don't need any jailbreaking or something like that to actually create generative content that is copyrighted usually. Because I just asked, make an image of Elsa doing this. So that's actually the bit shocking thing is that there was some protection before, and now this protection is gone. But I think is kind of happening there is that the big AI companies they don't care about it anymore, especially kind of introduced maybe through this woke AI Act and also Trump kind of saying that AI has to be very powerful from the US and so on. Because these ethical things, if you think from an AI company perspective, it's kind of noise. You don't really want to deal with that. Why should you? It's kind of yeah, if you're not really interested in ethics, it kind of makes your life harder. For what reason? So I think what we see now is that they open up for this creation, uh, and they will just push the responsibility to the user. So if you are making a picture from Frozen that is advertising your kind of, I don't know, weapon or whatever, Disney can sue you, but they will not sue the AI company. Well, what exactly will happen there, I don't know. So what that means for trademark, I think it's very difficult to say. The big companies, they will still be able to defend because they can just go to court and they will for sure somehow manage that you get taken down. But I think for smaller artists and people that put out their art on the internet and so on, this will be very difficult because do you really have the time and the money to go to court case against the company that maybe sits somewhere in China and doesn't. You don't really know what will be the outcome, so you cannot really do much. So I think that's very challenging. Since I also think that these big AI companies take a big responsibility for that because they should be the ones that should not allow to do this. Why should you suddenly, as a small artist, have to deal with that? I think that's kind of a we should not let them off the hook for this responsibility, but how it's looking now, it's kind of happening. So I think we need more research and better understanding about that in general.
And since it was mentioned before, like while talking. We have already talked about how this entire AI usage might affect, for instance, health of users, depending on what they use AI for. How do you view the issue of data safety of users then? Because a lot of the times people will upload something, for instance, for ChatGPT, like write me a CV or something, and they upload all their personal documents so that ChatGPT can summarize it. How do you view data safety for users with
Yeah.
AI?
I mean, data safety, security, and AI is kind of a huge nightmare if you see it from a security perspective. First of all, if you include an AI system into your software or company or whatever, it opens up a lot of security issues that we didn't have before. We can manipulate the system. It might delete the databases that you don't want. We saw all these cases before. So there's a huge problem there. And then, as you perfectly said, this people using these systems. And of course, everyone says, don't put in your private data, don't put in this and that. But people just do it. So, people are people. I'm sure I also put sometimes maybe some information about me that it shouldn't be there. So that's a big issue. And the only thing that we kind of have as a protection is the trust in these big tech companies. We have to trust that they follow some guidelines and they say, no, we don't use your data for training and so on or for other purposes. But that's only trust based. And that can easily change. We know that we have kind of difficult political climate in the world, which means at some point we may be at war with some countries we were not before, and then suddenly your data is there. Will they still not use it? I don't know. I don't think so. So it's a big problem. And I think there's no efficient way to protect beside of really make people aware of that. So that we really have to do that. And I think also for Europe in general, we have to build our own AI systems because now we're relying mostly on models from either China or US, and all our data goes somewhere else. So we really have to we have to work more on this, and we have to kind of build our own system so that we know that at least our data stays here. And you can also see that even if they say they don't use the data for training and so on, there are always security leaks happening. Those big security leaks with DeepSeek when it came out. Now we had you could Google ChatGPT chats from people and look at them. The same happened now with Grok. You could suddenly find chats from people on Google because they index them. So you cannot trust that your data is safe. It's a huge issue, and there's no easy solution. And I think it's also it's not just these consumer AIs that have a huge challenge there, but it's also own AI systems that people build, for example, for public sector or healthcare. Of course, they have a higher standard for data privacy, but it's often very good to, for example, anonymize a text and so on. So they maybe use some generative method to do that, which is not perfect. They don't test for it, means there will still be information coming in there. So it's not perfect at all this. And then we also have this other kind of aspect that, of course, a lot of companies now have their own kind of company AI systems. You can for example, buy Google and Gemini, and then you get your own Google Gemini system where explicitly the data is not used for training. So that sounds positive. Companies that don't have the money to do that, people will still want to use AI assistants. So you also get kind of this shadow IT, which is a problem that has existed for a long time when people use emails, for example, that are not work emails. But now you suddenly have these shadow IT AI systems. And just imagine people maybe have put in sensitive company data to Grok, and suddenly you can search for chats, and there might be company information in there or social security numbers or whatever. So it's a huge mess, I think.
So basically, to summarize some of the main points that you just raised with the issue of data security when using AI, we would need to spread way more awareness of how an AI works, also offering alternatives so that people don't always use the same big language models, like for instance, the ones from the US or from China, but also keep in mind that whatever you feed into the AI might be used somewhere else depending on how a situation changes. So that is actually, again, a very, very good point to keep people aware of their use depending on the AI tools.
I think what is one of the most important things we maybe have to work on, at least here in Norway, but I guess the same also in Austria, is building competence on several levels. We have to start with the kids that they're kind of aware of AI. They know what does ethics mean. So everything around AI literacy. We have to do this for the general public. They have to be aware what are AI systems, how do you use them well, how do you prompting, but also about the data issues and safety issues. And then we have to go further into education on the university level, where we actually make people and educate people that have deep technical understanding that they can build secure and safe AI systems, because that we are lacking. And then in addition to that, we also have to focus on the research part, because we also need researchers that go really deep into it and identify issues that we might not know today. So we really have to build competence on all these levels. And I don't see a kind of really structured approach to that. Everyone is talking about, oh, we have to do more research in our country, we have to make people more competent. But there is no good kind of systematic approach to actually address this problem.
So now, having talked about all the potential pitfalls that users can fall into whenever they work with AI programs or tools, how can the participants of the hackathon and developers in general now ensure a responsible approach whenever they use AI tools in their project?
So that's a good question. I think it's maybe the most responsible thing you can do at the very start is to think about, do I actually need AI to solve this task? And if you think, yes, I need AI to solve this task, then the next step would be to think about, how do I evaluate if the AI does the job? That's one thing. The other is, how do I evaluate what the impact of the AI is when it does the job? These are two important questions. And then after that, I would also think about, of course, not so important for the hackathon, but what data goes in, what are my responsibility there? Because I think we as developers, we should also think about that. We should not just give this responsibility to the user, like, okay, you user should know what you put in. It is also our responsibility. What data might we get in? How can we kind of maybe block data? If someone puts in a name, can we anonymize it and so on? That's one thing. And the other is, if you want to build it into a productive system, what are the security issues? Do I account for jailbreaking? What if someone jailbreaks my AI tool that should have done something fun and then suddenly use it to produce harmful content or something like that? What security holes do I open up, and all these things? So I think that's maybe the most important. And then, of course, it's a lot of fun to build innovative games and products using AI, but we should always think about this evaluation and effect part, in my opinion.
So keeping users or helping users understand the transparency behind using the tool, like what, as you mentioned, what goes in, what goes out, and also ensuring that the people who build the AI are very responsible or very aware of the responsibility, maybe let's put it like that, of the data that the AI is fed, and also thinking about security risks, like you said, maybe someone jailbreaking the tool or using it for harmful.
And I also think maybe in game development, if you develop a game that kind of is playing with the mental state of a person, you should also maybe think about that, because of course games did that since a very long time. It's kind of a fun with some games, but AI is kind of scaling that to a completely next level. So you can make something that is very manipulative, very good in finding out what are kind of the issues people have, and kind of work on that very focused, which I think we have to be careful. We shouldn't, or at least think about it, what you produce, what impact it could have on the people.
We also talked a little bit about evaluating the tools, because you said, yeah, there is not as much testing being done on the tools as one would love to. So would you agree that this is also something that would need to be improved on when allowing people to use AI tools, like improving on the testing beforehand, before the AI is open to the public?
Yeah, I think that's important. And there, I think we need the combination of automatic testing, metrics that we use for machine learning since forever, but also a good understanding and mapping of the metrics to the real world impact. And I think there's a lot of potential. What do specific metrics mean for the use case, the user at the end? I think we don't have enough research and experience on that. That's really important, I think. But then also this more manual user testing at the end. How do you actually catch feedback from the users that you should include? But also making, for example, tests or use other LLMs to test your system maybe before you give it to real users and so on. So there's a lot you can do. Maybe it's even an idea for kind of gamifying the testing somehow. That could be fun.
Something to think about when participating in the hackathon. Gamification and AI. This is it.
Yeah.
Hopefully someone will actually create a game that deals with all those aspects. It would be very, very fun and very useful, actually. Something to be used in universities and schools.
Exactly.
Wouldn't that be a fun thing?
If someone makes a game on evaluation of AI, that would be awesome.
giving the people ideas,
Yeah.
spreading some inspiration here. I love it. So basically, to summarize the points for a more responsible use, just think about, do you really need the AI? If you need the AI, okay, be aware of what it can do and if it will actually do the thing that you want the AI to take care of. Being very mindful of whatever data you put in and how it gets out. And also basically the in-between space between going in and going out, what happens there. Keeping users informed maybe also.
Yeah, that's also important. Yes, and I
Because
think also another aspect we didn't really scratch on, which is also important, is the environmental impact. Because if you use a huge model, you will have some impact on environment. So the question, which ties back to, do you really need AI? Which ties back to the question, do we actually need AI in games? Because that will also have some environmental impact. So I think this is also a kind of maybe a bit of philosophical, but also practical question.
basically being aware of the environment whenever using the AI, instead of using it as a easy way out of a question that you maybe have been able to answer yourself, or a task that maybe you could have done yourself, especially considering people are going to work in teams at a hackathon. So maybe before immediately jumping to AI, thinking, okay, can we actually take care of it in a meaningful way? Do we really need the tool? Do we really need to leave another footprint on the environment by using a bigger language model? So having now talked about all those possible ways to meaningfully and also responsibly use AI, I think there have been some very valuable tips and tricks to ensure that users or participants of the hackathon actually are very mindful of how to use AI tools. So thank you very much for all of those. And I think being aware of those core principles of transparency, responsibility, but also safety for users and the ones that professionally work with the AI tools, not just the players in that case, but also the ones developing, will hopefully be helpful for the participants of the hackathon, not just with the projects during the hackathon, but also in general afterwards. And maybe let's do a quick recap for the audience. So thanks to you, Michael, we can now differentiate between different kinds of AI and actually where AI came from, which I think is very useful to know if you want to work with a tool that's strong. We have also talked about various ways how AI can be utilized in various fields. We've talked about the mental health sector, the health sector in general, about using it in video games. And additionally, we were able to discuss the basically most common pitfalls when it comes to using AI, especially in terms of transparency, usability, maybe needing the AI or maybe needing it not, ethical concerns, I think a very, very big part, environmental concerns as well, and also the issues with copyright and that AI might infringe on copyright without the user knowing. Like you mentioned with the Disney and Nintendo example, the AI might tell you, oh no, nothing's going to be infringed upon, everything will be all right. And all of a sudden you have Elsa and Mario picnicking with cigarettes. And in the end, I think we were able to show the audience how they can implement AI tools in a meaningful way, hopefully, and also being very responsible of the impact both for them and for their players or users, depending on their future project. And also keeping in mind the user safety first and foremost, transparency, and also being mindful of potential stereotypes depending which language model one uses, because I think that is a very big concern that a lot of people have and that we were also able to talk about. And to basically continue the conversation for everyone who's been listening, watching, this goes out directly to the participants of the hackathon. Find teammates, or if you want to ask us questions, please join our Discord server. This will all be put in the description. And also we'll have another episode and a Q&A where we can answer questions about any kinds of concerns that people might have. For any other information that people might need regarding the hackathon, please check out the ACM Hackathon webpage. Will all be put in the show notes, or if this goes to Instagram, in the description. And that's all that we have today, or all that I have today. A huge thank you again for Michael for walking us through these creative methods. What are your final words that you would love to give out to the participants of the hackathon?
Oh, yeah, that's difficult. I think maybe the most important is, if you're a developer, don't just talk about responsible AI, but actually do it and take it as a task. I think that's the most important. Making responsible and safe AI is not a hinder for innovation. I think it could also be seen as an enabler for new, really exciting AI systems that are actually useful.
So less words and more action, basically.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for those very impactful last words. And thank you everyone who's been listening, who's been watching, and we will see you at the hackathon. Thanks.
Thank you too.
Hi. So Tom, you can now stop